over 6 o'clock and we have an incredible session lined up here with Tom Winter from Pride in Sport. We are so excited to have you here for our first Pride in Lifesaving event. Before we kick off, Wamajeka, welcome. If you just feel the ground underneath you for a moment, wiggle your toes, look out the window at the water and the beautiful surroundings that we have here. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet here, and that is the Boonwurrung people of the South East Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and any First Nations here tonight and joining us online. We are so chuffed. I can't wipe the smile off my face. This has been an incredible journey and an incredible journey ahead as well, and we do this all together. We're so grateful that you are here. But before we introduce our speaker for tonight, our facilitator, our MC, our everything, we will just do a little bit of an introduction into the journey to get us here, and also offering any opportunity to ask any questions or add in any advice that you would like along the way. Tonight is about networking. Tonight is about asking the questions, and we have some incredible people in the room here to support you. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Emma Atkins, our GM of people here that everybody knows very, very well, to finish off this introduction, and enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's a small but dedicated group. It has to start somewhere, hey? And this is a journey we're on. We're now a proud member of Pride in Sport, so we've got the experts in the room, which I think is fabulous. But we've got a variety of rainbow community, allies, people that just want to make LSV and our clubs and our part of the community and as welcoming and inclusive as we can possibly be. So, and our wonderful aquatic industry as well. So, just a couple of acknowledgements. Paul James, our president, is here. It starts at the top, so thank you for being here. Paul, no one noticed. You know, tonight's about bringing people together. Nancy, thanks for being here. Nancy is heads up the Development Advisory Committee at SLSA, obviously a president as well, and past director of LSV, but has been a force to push this forward at a national event, and accepted a Pride in Sport award on behalf of SLSA and Lifesavers with Pride, as did James, who I'll introduce, but these wonderful boards that are such an important reflection of the journey that we're on. And of course, James, who has been one of the biggest advocates in this space and has pushed us to do better, and is now a Victorian member of Lifesavers with Pride, so that I'm pretty tough to have a Vic on that Lifesavers with Pride, and I'm sure you are representing us tremendously, but thank you for all the pushes and everything you've done, and all the enthusiasm around the room. I could speak to every single one of you because you're all part of this journey we're on. We don't know everything. We get things wrong, as we all do, and you know, the theme tonight is ask the question, because I think, you know, that's communication and asking how we become more welcoming, inclusive, and what our rainbow community wants to see us do is going to be really, really important in this journey. So thanks for being part of our journey. Thanks, Sheila, for your enthusiasm you bring and your spurring us on. Lucky enough to be on Joy FM this afternoon talking about this event, so hopefully we can get some more of our wonderful people up. I know James did something with Joy FM not that long ago. Oh no, Guy did. You did. Yeah, with Sienna as well. So I think we've got a bit of a road to do. But you know, SLSA doing some work on inclusion and diversity framework and strategy. You know, LSV will do the same. You know, it's a really good time I think, to learn and network and ask those right questions. So thanks for being here. Thanks for your dedication. You know, next time we do this, I'm sure there'll be hundreds of people in the room. So it starts with some. So thanks for being here.
Right, awesome. Quite the intro, expert, see all those things. That was pretty cool. I like that. No, so as Sheila and Emma have said, Tom's my name. I'm the relationship manager at Pride in Sport. My pronouns are he and him, and I'll be chatting to you all for an hour and a half. See how fun it is. Might be 45 minutes. Everyone might walk out. Don't do that. There's food at the end. This was working before.
Is it turned on?
Is that a thing?
Is it
Says the trainer.
Yeah.
But this is high tech for us. I've never seen one of these things before. Small false start. Actually, just while that's happening, I'm actually pumped to be here. It was really cool last Wednesday, obviously. The board's got the award, which is sweet. Like, we've done a bit of work with SLSA, obviously now with LSV. We saw these designs, I don't know, 7 or 8 months ago, probably. And we were pretty pumped about them then. So I actually just texted all the group. I've seen them in real life and they look even better. So I was really excited to be able to come along tonight and have a chat. So, do you want me to give you just like the number? Wicked. All right, off we go. Yeah, just echoing Sheila's acknowledgement. That was brilliant. So, same goes for me. Most of the stuff we talk about, you've probably worked out quite quickly. Fairly light and breezy. I like this to be conversational, but the reality is that some of the stuff we talk about tonight is confronting, and some of the data sucks, and it's not fun to read. And if you need to have a drink, if you need to walk out, I hope you'll come back. But if you need to look after yourself tonight, do that by all means. That's the most important thing. Chat to any of us afterwards, providers, all of that. As I said, hopefully it's not that confronting, but there is a couple of bits that generally are. So these are the things we're going to talk about tonight. Now, I said to Sheila when I got here, if anything comes up and you have questions about any of the stuff, if there's words I say that don't make sense to you, if you feel like you've got something to add, interrupt me at any point. If we get through 2 slides and we sit here and have a conversation for an hour, it's a massive tick for me. So please don't feel like we're hamstrung by what's on the screen. Like, we can just chat. It's a small group. That's the best part about this. So broadly speaking, what we'd love to look at tonight is the importance of creating that space. And I know that across multiple levels in Lifesaving now, that's clearly the direction we're headed, which is brilliant. We're going to talk about some lived experiences. We're going to talk about what we call the heteronormative binary, which covers those 4 areas. And then we're going to talk some ally stuff. Now, particularly, I always feel when I come to do sessions like this, as a straight white guy, as you're saying to Sheila, who hasn't faced 1 second of diversity in my entire life, it feels a bit weird sometimes. So you're like, oh, these are some of the lived experiences. A lot of the stuff we talk about comes from data, but I'm also super lucky that Pride in Sport is part of a broader business called ACON, which is the AIDS Council of New South Wales. We have about 170 staff, give or take, across Australia, and there's 2 of us who are allies. So in that space, and this is their words, not mine, I'm the diversity hire. So when I go to our national conference, it's really funny that someone asked me we had our national conference in December last year, and one of the people comes up after and goes, Tom, what's it like being straight working at ACON? And I was like, it's the first time I've ever been like, what's it like being straight in that environment? Because most of the time, I'm everyone. So that's kind of where, like, I definitely go through these phases. And if you're allies in the room, you'll understand probably when we start talking rainbow community and we start advocating, we go through these big peaks and troughs where it's like, I'm the right person to talk about it, because if I'm sitting in a sports room, statistically 90% of people are me. But then you go through these troughs where it's like, oh, who am I to talk about this stuff? Fortunately, I've been at ACON for 18 months now. I was at Hockey Australia prior to that, which I think we'll touch on a little bit later tonight. So I feel like I've got that good sort of experience across a number of spaces. So that's where my experience comes from. Wicked. So we're going to start a bit of chat now because it feels like a monologue otherwise. I'm
so sorry I lost. I'm so excited.
Thought something bad happened, though. We're good. Wicked.
I'm doing nothing else.
So we're going to talk a bit about these three words. Now, safe space here. I hate the bottom one. I hate that it's in our presentation. Tolerance is a bar that we should have stepped over 50 years ago. Unfortunately, we haven't. As far as in this room, we're not going to deal with that because it doesn't really offer us much, right? What I kind of want to get from you, and you can talk about this from a broad LSV perspective, you can talk about it from SLSA, you can talk about it from club, you can talk about it from home, whatever. And it's just nice to start throwing words out there from people who aren't me. What's inclusion to the room? Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? How can you bring it day to day? And I know it's a massive question, and if we had a snappy answer, then I probably wouldn't be standing in the room, but kind of just to sort of start throwing ideas around and stop me talking. So please feel free, anyone, yell it out. What is inclusion to you?
Allows everybody access to anything they want to do.
Yeah, great.
Just treating everyone equally with respect, like as you would like to be treated. So it's just, saying hello to everyone, because saying hello to everyone, then that's just what you do to everyone.
Yeah, brilliant. And this is great. Quick answers are really make me calm down into this. How do we look at, if we look at acceptance and inclusion, what is the difference between those two things? Action. Yeah, love that. I mean, that's terrific. I think that's the entire slide that I've got written there. Yeah, 100%. It's active, right? It's not passive. So Ben, who, we've only got 3 people that work in Pride and Sport. We've got Bo, who's the big boss, and then Ben and myself. And Ben always says to me, that a passive ally is, he uses much worse language than this, but a passive ally is no use to us. Because the only difference between a passive ally and someone who doesn't tolerate inclusion is basically nothing. Like, the person doesn't tolerate it might say some bad stuff, but that's pretty much where it starts and stops, right? The only way that we can advance inclusion, and that's across any arm of D&I, is by action. So we can call out behaviour and we can come to sessions like this. And actually, I walked in, there was rainbows clearly in here everywhere. I've got hundreds of them, but the only thing, I do have my socks on. So I have actually got a rainbow on, but it's not great when you wear long pants. So, but yeah, it's active. We want to start talking about being an active ally rather than just being a passive ally, which is sort of, we sit around and go, geez, Pride rounds are good, and it's great that LSV are part of this and SLSA are part of this, but and that's sort of it. So we're going to talk a bit about how we can kind of progress that. What have something for me for a second there? Cool. So look, a lot of our slides are going to have a lot of words on them. I don't read them all, but I like to touch on a couple of points here. So this is where we talk about behaviours and we don't talk about beliefs. So beliefs are formed, like culture and religion and the school you went to and your family and your mates, and everything forms that. Like, we might be here for an hour and a half tonight, we might write some great policy, but it's very unlikely and right next door to impossible that I'm going to change anyone's beliefs in an hour, right? What we can do is we can talk about how behaviours impact people's experiences in space. So really we focus on behaviour, we focus on tangible outcomes, we don't talk about beliefs or anything like that. And the bottom piece there is around that we want to create an environment where people can be themselves, whether or not they then tell everyone about themselves. We want to create a space where people can be themselves, and it's not a KPI that anyone who might be LGBTQ in our Surf Lifesaving clubs then has to come out and announce it to everyone, right? Like, that's not a KPI of this. It's not like, oh, we had 15 people come and tell us that they're out, so we won inclusion. Like, it's really important just to create a good space for everyone. So now we delve a bit more into why LGBTQ inclusion is so important. Now, we look at this and we talk about the fact that sexual orientation and gender identity are central to everyone. So it's really core. So I often talk about this now, and it's where I'll tell you about my girlfriend Liz. We live in North Bourne. We've got a little dog. Actually, we would have loved to come down to the beach tonight, but Liz had an osteo appointment, so bad luck. But, I can tell you about her, and if you look at my phone, you'll see that she's probably on my background. And if you look at my social media, she exists and she's everywhere. And I can tell everyone in this room that, and I've known you for 30 seconds, and I'm not worried about the response. No one's going to wince. No one's going to think, well, maybe you'll think differently of me, but generally speaking, you won't, right? It's a really easy thing for me to do, is share all of that stuff with you in the first instance. Now, small flex for me, she's actually now my fiance, but that's a beautiful genderless term, which doesn't work into this story very well at all. So it's something that I can share really easily now, whether explicitly or not. That's not the case for everyone, particularly in sporting environments. So we see, women's sport is a lot more accepting, but in men's sport, coming out is a big deal, and you have to go and talk to the media, and you have to, it's this huge thing. So even working in sport, it's still probably something that people have to consider whether or not they share that part of their life. Whereas I can do it with you in one room in 10 minutes and I'm totally comfortable and walk out and never think about it again. So it's really critical just to understand that being straight is a sexual orientation, and me being male, that's also a gender identity. Everyone's got one. They're all critical parts of who we are. We've got a video. I hope this works. I didn't break it on this part. It should be though. The text feels like we're on a roll now. Afterwards, I just want to chat a bit about like what you saw and what you hear. Is there any emotions that you see from the people in this video that you don't necessarily associate with sport yet? And yeah, we'll just have a bit of a talk about it afterwards.
You just pass me by. It still makes me cry.
It was a common thing, oh, don't be gay, or don't be soft, or don't be a girl.
I came out as bi and I had a male partner. People were like, but what does that mean?
I had a guy call me a faggot in the middle of the game.
There's so many trans guys that want to play sport, but they can't or they won't because they're too afraid to.
You don't want girls to feel uncomfortable because you're touching them and they think that it's because you're gay, when it's actually just because you're playing a sport.
It's scary to be different.
I was a bit nervous about joining the club because I was like worried about people's, discrimination and stuff like that.
I think there's this perception that being gay is less than.
People often assume that lesbians playing sport are going to be really darky and really tough and aggressive.
It was a common thing, oh, don't be gay, or don't be soft, or don't be a girl.
I came out as bi and I had a male partner. People were like, but what does that really mean?
I was called a faggot and physically attacked during a game.
In high school, I remember specifically never wanting anyone to know that I was gay because when it did come to PE and we were in the change rooms or getting ready, I didn't want girls to feel uncomfortable because they thought that I was creeping on them.
Like I'm in a Facebook group, I think there's 800 members. Not all of them are trans men, but predominantly in Victoria. And consistently threads come up. Does anyone know like what this team would be like if I went to play with them or like it's a theme that a lot of young trans guys are too scared to join a cis men or a proper men's team, because they're afraid of everyone's going to treat them.
I did not feel comfortable talking about being gay at all. I didn't come out. I left the small town before. As soon as I turned 18, I was gone.
I didn't tell them initially that I was trans until Yeah, until after a while.
This happened with grown men in their 30s last year, 2018.
I think that's why a lot of people still prefer to play with inclusive LGBTIQ teams rather than gender identity sporting teams, because they don't want to have to explain themselves or excuse themselves or try and navigate the feelings of the other players in the team.
Yeah, this year I started playing touch rugby league, and it was mixed, so there's half men, half women. I haven't come out to them. I don't think that it's relevant, but yeah, I don't think I'd feel safe doing it anyway.
So it starts with a pretty bleak picture. Anyone want to start? What do you see?
Yeah, when that last bit was a bit confronting because the person that identified was trans community said that he didn't feel it was relevant to be able to say it, and yet it wasn't because, like what you said before, you were quite comfortable to say everything that you have and what surrounds you, and that culture, I think, still, even though that we are pushing so much forward, there is still that blanket of uncomfortableness. So I think if we do stuff, we've got to do stuff extra, just make sure that people are feeling that comfortable to do it. So that sort of makes me a bit sad to see that. I know it's a reality, but it's confronting that people can't just talk.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and something we'll talk about a little bit later is self-editing, and like the fact that I'm very conscious I don't have to do that. I can tell anyone about anything, but the amount of energy that person would have to spend going, oh, what if I refer to myself like this, or what if someone reads a text, right, like over my shoulder, or can they overhear a phone call, and all these things are just so much energy that person's spending that could be just better spent being mates with the people that they're playing with. Yeah, I think it's a good call. Anyone else want to share anything?
Sport's supposed to be a place of community joy, and no one in that video portrayed anything about being happy and enjoyable and feeling like they were part of that community because they don't feel like they can be themselves.
Yeah.
That would be exhausting.
Yeah, I really love that point because I'm a sports person. Like, I've played sport my whole life, and I'm a huge believer that sport can be all of those great things. And the reason that I do what I do is to try and open as many of the doors that are possible and smash holes in the walls to get people inside sporting environments, because I have lived the good stuff that it can offer, right? And a lot of this stuff, I'm always so conscious, because my view is that I love sport so much. I'm so conscious that a lot of the stuff I talk about is like, well, sport sucks, and sport's so homophobic, and sport's unsafe for trans people, and sport, like, just steer clear of it, right? That's not my belief at all. The important part is, and I also hate going to speak to people who, like so many volunteers, like, you do this because you love it, and you should keep doing this because you love it, because it does so much good stuff. But we do have to sit with the uncomfortable reality of where we are right now, and we don't necessarily provide the best offering to our entire community. That's not to tell us that we shouldn't keep doing all the good stuff we're doing. We just have to find ways that we can make it more available to more people, which really, like, as I said, I'm on the board of, on the committee at my local hockey club, and like 10 years ago they were going, oh, I think we're like at capacity, which, I mean, if you work in club sports, you know that's a complete nonsense. But anyway, I was like, not only are we not at capacity, like, we're only getting such a small segment of who's out there and who want to come and play our sport. So it's really, I appreciate you raised that, because I don't like sitting in a room with people who are here at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night telling them how crap sport is for the LGBTQ community, because I don't think that's the case. Yeah, look, if you have any other points as we move forward, please raise them, but it's really good. we're going to talk some evidence, which newsflash kind of goes against everything I just said right then. It's also a bit grim. We use workplace to start here. We're going to talk about sporting sector, so those who work in it, and then we're going to talk about on the field stuff. So again, I don't go through very many of these stats. This is workplace stuff. It comes from our AWEI, which is Pride in Sport. We have Pride and Diversity, which is our corporate arm. This is their data. So really the only bit that I like to touch on here, and hopefully you're reading them as I'm just chatting away, is that 55% of people with diverse sexual orientations are in the closet within their workplace. So important just to kind of use that. That's the baseline we like to use as we work through sporting sector and then as we go into on the field. These stats we do look at, this is a survey that we do, so some people from, I don't know if you did this year, but I'm sure next year, and SLSA definitely circulated this. So these are all people who work in the sector. So you can see there that 16% of people who work in sport identify with a diverse sexual orientation or gender. 25% of people disagree that there are more than two genders, which I always just like to point out. I think this is an education piece. I think as we move through next year's survey and the year after that and the year after that, that number will, we don't need that line. I think people will start to learn stuff. That's cool. This is where we're at the moment. Nearly 60% of people think their sport should put more effort into LGBTQ inclusion. Obviously, I love that. I think sports that I've worked with in the past, they got it. Lifesaving definitely gets it. That's great. And then 20% of people, only 20% of people think the work their sport's doing is genuine. So that probably falls into the, we do pride rounds because pride rounds are cool. That would be what people are perceiving at the moment. It's sports that don't do policy. It's sports that don't offer training. It's sports that don't really do anything except for slap a rainbow on a playing jersey and sell it for 5 billion copies of it, because every time you whack a rainbow on a professional sporting jumper, it sells out in 30 seconds, which is great. The visibility piece there is fantastic. If we're doing nothing behind the scenes, it's not as useful, and definitely in our organisation, it's kind of the last thing we recommend. So yeah.
Just on that previous slide.
Yeah.
58% of people who work in the Australian sporting sector, so these are just sports professionals.
Correct.
As such. What's the other 42% believe? Do they believe the exact opposite, or is it a varying degree, or is it no opinion, or where's that sit?
Yeah.
So how do we get to that group?
Good question. That is a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know, but we can definitely look at that from last year's survey, and I'll also get it through from this year's survey to see, because it is like an agree, strongly agree, neutral. So it would be on a scale rather than like 58% think we should do more and 42% think it's a waste of time. It wouldn't be that at all.
Because I'm thinking we're all here to bring people along on this journey.
Definitely.
So there's, to me, the target market's that 42%. If we turn them on onto the same pathway,
totally.
We're 100% heading in the right direction. That's a good thing to be doing.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's a really good point as well. So yeah, we'll get that. So this is on the field stuff now. So look, granted, always important, like this data is quite old. Unfortunately, researchers there's not that much research on this around at the moment. It's more and more happening, but like the nature of research is, it comes out when it comes out, unfortunately. So 80% of participants have witnessed or experienced homophobia in sport over a previous 12-month block. I think probably we would agree that number hasn't decreased drastically, like language and jokes and those things, unfortunately, it still exists. Like as I say, I play hockey. It's a pretty inclusive sport, broadly speaking. Like I've heard homophobic language in the last 12 months, and people know what I do for a job. So they're pretty conscious of not doing it around me, I suspect, and yet people still slip up and they still use the language and all those sorts of things. So I imagine that number's pretty similar.
I would think as well, when you talk about that 80%, there's a point that I wrote down is not having to come out, not being forced to come out and still identify with who you are.
Yep.
I think a lot of that surrounds as well trying to out people, where they're trying to sort of bait them and sort of get that conversation started. And then they sort of look and they just wait for that reaction as well. So I think that's to tie into what you were saying before about being forced to come out. A lot of that dialogue needs to also go there to say that someone doesn't have to identify as anything.
Definitely.
We've just got to create that space.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's actually in another session we run, we do scenario stuff, and one of the scenarios is, off the top of my head, something like, a coach at my local club thinks another coach might be LGBTQ and comes up to me and says, how do we help them, or something along those lines. And it's always a funny one to talk through, because first things first, they don't need any help, they're fine. Secondly, it's probably not you they're going to for help. There's a host of reasons why, but it's that exact thing, right? We should not use that language, and that's the end of the sentence.
Yeah.
And then it definitely shouldn't be used to try and spark someone, because I've come from this place where I didn't know how hurtful language can be, even if it's not directed at someone. So yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a really good call too. 75% of people believe that an openly gay person wouldn't be safe as a spectator. Probably read that stat 3,000 times, and still annoys me a bit. I love going to watch sport, whether it be community level or professional level. I think everyone should be able to do that. 50% of gay men, 48% of lesbians, and 28% of straight men have been targeted with that homophobic language, which is kind of exactly what you're talking about, right? It can be used as a personal and a really targeted attack, and we see that. But in sporting contexts, it also worked at, there's certain words that have just worked their way into vernacular and people use them, and then they go, it's white line fever and all this sort of stuff. And that's definitely the scope in which I've heard it. Playing hockey is, teammates of mine use this language. We don't do that. And then you have to kind of help them understand. And anyway, but I think that shows that it's not always targeted at people who are out. It's just used at the moment. And then in comparison to that 55%, that 87% of gay men, 75% of lesbians playing youth sports, that's 25 and under, are not out. So the gap is pretty significant. We then move and talk about the invisible stigmatised identity you can see in the middle there. So in this, we refer to someone's sexual orientation or gender identity as an invisible part of their life. It's not something you can walk into a room and people holding a sign or wearing a T-shirt, it's not something we know. You don't know until you start meeting people and they're safe and all of that. And when someone comes into a new environment, that's when we start to attach stigma to identity. So that can happen kind of internally and externally. So internal can be bad experiences that they've had and words they've heard and family experiences, and maybe it's a sport or work or whatever. The external stuff is, Idaho, it's basically the best day to talk about it, because it was 1990 that homosexuality was taken off the World Health Organization's list of disorders, and it wasn't like being homosexual in Tasmania was illegal until 1997, which is mad to think about. And that's so recently. It always baffles me. But so naturally there's going to be stigma, and of course we look into news of recent times, and if anyone's on Twitter, it's a pretty dark place, but it's still stigmatised. Not by very smart people, but by people nonetheless. So those two things can really impact on someone, how someone feels about themselves and their life. And when they walk into a new space, so if we use the workplace for an example, very rarely will people start a new job out. So they look for cues. And we always talk about, if they walked into this room, probably would feel quite safe, as brave as ever, and it's bothered a whole lot talking about it, and that's brilliant. But that's not the case in every workplace, probably not most workplaces. So you would hear whether it be homophobic jokes, whether it be misogynistic jokes, whether it be casual racism, all of those things point to a place that is not safe to be yourself, regardless of who that is. And the more negative cues we see and the more negative things we hear, it just sort of puts more weight to the fact that a new space isn't safe. So whether that be work or sport, whatever it is. And then that leads to all these things. So it leads to diminished cohesion with your team. So if you can't, we often do an activity, I referenced before, this self-edit. We often do this activity where we put two people who have never met each other together and we just say, just chat for 10 minutes, which sometimes feels really long. But you can't talk about your sexual, the gender of anyone you're talking about in your story, so you have to use all gender neutral language. Can't reveal your sexual orientation and you can't lie in this 10 minutes. And so it goes one of two ways. People come back in the room and they go, nailed it. Didn't slip up, 10 out of 10. Right, that's cool. What'd you talk about? Talked about my job. Okay, great, that is good. So it's terrific if you can have a conversation with someone and you don't share any of that information for 10 minutes. And then we sort of say, what if you had to talk for 5 more hours? How would you go? How interesting is your job? And they go, oh, probably get hard, I guess. Great, what if you had to come back tomorrow, same rules applied, and you still couldn't talk about any of that stuff? Yeah, that would be really hard. It's like, think about all the energy that you're using and all of the parts of your life that you can't talk to your colleagues about or your teammates at sport. Like, how often do you get to, like I know I get to training on a Tuesday night with my teammates and we talk about all the stuff that happened. Like, a lot of it is just sport stuff. We just talk about footy or we talk about the basketball or whatever's going on. But of course, it's like they say to me, how's Liz? And I ask them, how's your partner? And how's all of this stuff? And so we like to be, in this bit, really empathetic to just imagining what it would be like if you can't talk about your partner and you can't share what you did on the weekend. And you have to be conscious of what's on your phone lock screen. And you have to be conscious of who you're texting or who you're calling in the space. And, you know, back old school when we all had desks, like what photos you had on your desk. And like, all of these things are so easy to overlook until you're put in a position where you have to actually consider the impact that that would have on your day-to-day. Now, I'm pretty glass half full, so I also like to look at the flip side of this. So if someone was to walk into this room and they saw 100 rainbow flags and they saw people using, and heard people using gender-neutral terms, and they heard us talking about empathy and they heard us talking about inclusion, it's immediately like, okay, actually this is a space I can be me here, this is cool. And they might have a conversation and instead of saying, oh, how's your girlfriend, to me, you say, oh, how's your partner? And immediately it's like, okay, actually, now not only are they giving me the rainbow flag, they're starting to ask questions that are nice. And a good mate of mine who was at the awards the other night, he was up for out role model of the year. Alex, his name is a cyclist, he's wicked. But he isn't out to everyone. So his good mates, he's not out to, but not because he's ashamed or stigmatised or any of that, because their language is really sloppy. So they ask him every single time they see him, oh, Smythe, you got a girlfriend yet? And he goes, no. And I was chatting to him, I said, oh, how do you feel? He goes, I don't really care. It's going to be a hell of a shock when I turn up with my boyfriend. And none of them, I've known him for 20 years. He's a bit sick like that. He thinks it's going to be a really funny joke. But he said to me, if one of them said to me, are you seeing anyone? I would answer and tell. And it's such a small thing. It's such a tiny change in language from, do you have a girlfriend, to are you seeing someone? But it immediately opens this door for him to say, actually, yeah, I am. And then they get to witness a whole nother part of him and he gets to be himself in the space, and you know, he doesn't have to just work in LGBTQ spaces to be himself. And as a straight guy and an ally, I think that tiny change, like if you walk out of tonight and you never ask someone, do they have insert gender term, it's a win. It's a big step in the right direction, and it's a much bigger step than it sounds like it would be. Language. We're going to talk about acronyms. We're going to talk about sex characteristics and gender identity and sexual orientation, gender expression. This is a lot. I'll be honest up front. It's the most wordy and complex bit, and you're not going to learn it all in the next 15 minutes, but some of it is really important. If you can just pick little bits out, then I strongly recommend doing that. Also, if you have questions, please interrupt me because I feel like I've been talking forever. We talk about acronym. You may or may not have picked up on, I use LGBTQ. I don't have an I in there. Pride and Sport doesn't work with intersex communities. We'll talk about that in a second, but there's not a correct acronym and there's not an incorrect acronym. Again, as a straight guy, the more I learn, the stupider the acronym becomes a little bit to me. Like, all of those letters represent people who have really, really vast lived experience, and they're not, it's not the same. And like, I get it, it's convenient, we've got an acronym, it's cool, it goes into the flag or whatever, but it's really important to understand that just because we can say an acronym, it doesn't mean we're representing everyone. It's actually just a convenience thing, which I think is easier for me to say than some other people that I work with, but I think it's important to acknowledge. Next little activity, gets me off the hook for a second. Everyone should have a phone because it's 2023. There'll be terms up there that you know, and there'll definitely be terms up there that you don't know. Pull your phone out, Google something, anything. Any of those terms is fine. And if you're comfortable sharing with us what you Googled and what Google tells you it is, then just go ahead and yell it out.
It's really cool, the brother boy.
Yeah. Who else? Did everyone do that? Yeah, awesome. That is not uncommon, by the way. Yeah, terrific.
It's the sister girl. It's a community that I think is incredible. I think when you go into those Indigenous communities that just take away all the stuff that we add in our culture. We have that toxic masculinity. We have even toxic gay community. Because I worked in I run the Peel Hotel, which is a gay nightclub in the city. Did that for about 6 years, and some of that environment I just wouldn't want any young people to go into. It's horrible.
Yep.
But that sister, and the brother boy, all of those communities, I think gets back to exactly where I think it's comfortable. It feels natural. They feel supported amongst their group. And I think it does get polluted when it goes outside of their community, when they blend in with what the community has been made to do, as opposed to what they've done for tens of thousands of years. It gets changed a bit, but that's that core of the way that they respect that in that person, and they give them a place in their society. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's great. And did everyone Google that, just to confirm?
Yeah.
Yeah, terrific. That happens pretty regularly. Actually, I did a session last week and no one Googled it, which blew my mind because we've done hundreds of these things and every time someone does it. Anyway, I do actually like it when people Google it because now you've all seen the definitions and they're better than what I could run with off the top of my head. But it also sort of points me down, and I like to make 2 points basically off the back of brother boy and sister girl. One of them is that it's obviously an Indigenous term used for transgender people, but it's not used by everyone. So you couldn't just walk into every single Indigenous community, First Nations community across Australia, use that term to refer to trans people and it would be okay. So that shows us that, firstly, it took 10 seconds to Google something, so it's awesome. Ever have a question again? Chuck it into Google. Like, search history might get a bit weird, but you'll live. You should see my search history, it's wild. But anyway, but it takes no time at all to ask Google. You don't have to be inappropriate to anyone and you can learn some stuff really quickly. It also shows us that just because I now know a term that represents some people, it doesn't represent everyone. So we talk about, and I will later on, talk about mirroring language and not using terms to refer to people unless they use that term to refer to themselves. It's also pretty relevant when we start talking about some of these words, but particularly the word queer. Like, as an ally, it's a word I'm generally quite hesitant to use because I work, as I say, 180 people, but in our division we've got about 30. And I would say it's almost 50-50 between people who will introduce themselves as queer at the start of every time they speak and people who will have a really visceral negative reaction to that word. So recommendation, and that's for any term, but wait until we've heard someone use that term to talk about themselves before we just start throwing stuff that we Google around. So we do have to be a bit careful. The other words we just like to highlight here quickly are lifestyle and preference. I'm sure everyone's heard the term sexual preference before. Don't know the most polite way to say it, but don't do that anymore. It's really old, it's really archaic. It indicates it's a decision and something that like don't make a choice, and all of the stuff we know not to be true. So just really good in these spaces to say like, we can do a lot of positive talk and a lot of like, we can do this and we can do this. Preference and lifestyle, like, move them to the side, leave them out, leave them here and never pick them up again.
Can I just ask with your acronyms?
Yeah.
Things, because it obviously changes over time.
That's
it used to be common to say LGBT plus community. Is it still okay to use plus?
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
to incorporate the whole?
Definitely, yeah. So LGBTQ, LGBTQ plus, LGBTQIA plus, any of them are pretty much fine. As I say, we don't, only for the fact that I think the plus can get a bit confusing, like people aren't necessarily sure what it means. Some of the letters aren't brilliant, but yeah, if you use, a lot of organisations we work with just run with LGBTIQA plus because it's like, we'll just use as many letters as we possibly can, and therefore they're less likely to leave people out. So that's totally okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick one on that. This is a really quick example, but I think it's also like the environment that you're in, or if you go to, like, I went to this private sport gym the other night, and in my speech notes, I think it did have LGBTIQ plus, but everyone was just saying LGBTQ, and I picked it up quite quickly. So I just referred to that in my speech notes. So I think it's just been, for me, it's just being conscious of what everyone else is saying, and being conscious of, you know, the environment that you're in, because everyone does use different terminology, which does make it hard. And so my decision was just to go with the terminology that there's the majority of people we use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the terminology piece is easily the most confusing part of all this. Like, because, and I know I probably come from a really similar place where it's like, I just want to get that right. Because I don't want to offend anyone, I don't want to upset anyone, I don't want to leave anyone out. And so I totally get that. I think that's one of the biggest barriers to people starting to do stuff, because I know, and you know, I think we're doing a chat after some, we might touch on it, but the hardest thing for people to do is ask one question. Whatever their first question is around rainbow work, the first one is the hardest question, because I know the same for me. In fact, when I started, I was at Hockey Australia and I went to a Pride in Sport event, and everyone's going around the table introducing themselves, name and pronouns, and I was sitting there going, I have literally no idea what I'm about to do, because I'd never done it before. I was terrified. And I was like, oh, well, yep, Tom, he, him, and like, everyone just moved through the next person later. Okay, well, I didn't stuff that up, but I had no idea what I was doing. And the first question of mine was like, why do we do that? And simple question, small question, quick question, but then the way, and it was funny, it was with Bo, who's now my boss, but the way I answered it was like, oh, it just allows people to like, you know, it's sort of, you know, a positive cue and it's a safe place and all this. And he answered it so nicely, and I was like, okay, cool, well, I can probably ask another question now. And then I can ask another one, and fast forward, and here I am telling people how we can get better at this. So I'm a huge advocate. Literally, if you take nothing else from tonight, if you can create a space in your clubs, someone can come and ask someone else a question, you're on the right path. So now heteronormative binary. Has anyone heard that before? You've heard it before? Do you want to tell us what it is? Just put you on the spot.
Oh god, I can give it a crack. I don't know if we're correct, but heteronormative, so heterosexual being like the usual that people see and it's always assumed.
Yeah, brilliant. Assumes straight unless otherwise stated. Yeah, perfect. Everyone can clap for that. That for sure. So straight unless like otherwise informed, basically, right? So in essence, and sport is one of the all-time examples of this, we live in one of these two lines. We start, our sex assigned at birth informs the whole way that the rest of our life is designed to pan out. So for me, this works because I was sex assigned at birth as male. I identify as a man, masculine, and I'm attracted to it. So that works, and for a lot of people, it does. So for stats on this are harder than the stats on the other stuff, knowing exactly the number, but it's somewhere from 80 to 85% of people this will work, right? But the problem is it's so prescriptive. It says that each one of these areas is informed by or relies on the last one and informs the next one, when we just know that not to be the case anymore. So we're going to just go through each of these, chat through a little bit about what each of them means, and then by the end of it, we're basically just going to try and have a space where it's a bit broken up. You go, actually, these two lines are not that useful when we're looking to pan out someone's life. So we start at sex assigned at birth. It's pretty straightforward. The doctor sees genitalia, male or female, they tick the box, and basically that sets us off on the nice blue or the pink line. As I said before, we don't use the I, so we don't work with intersex communities. Pride in Sport and a lot of sporting organisations don't. There's those two organisations down the bottom, Intersex Human Rights and Intersex Peer Support, do basically all the work in Australia. A lot of sports, and possibly, don't know if Active Miners done it, but affirm the Darlington Statement, which basically says, in much nicer and more elaborate terms, like we're hands off when it comes to intersex. We defer to experts on that. It's obviously quite a complex space, and I don't know anything about it. So if I kept speaking, I would probably say the wrong thing. But yeah, we've done the Darlington Statement. If you want to learn about it, I recommend looking at those websites. I can give them to you afterwards if anyone's interested. We then talk about gender identity. So it's possible you've heard the term cisgendered. I almost guarantee you've heard the term transgender. Cis basically means the same side as. So I'm cisgender. It means that my gender identity aligns with my sex assigned at birth. And we kind of reflect on this by getting everyone to think back if you had a moment when you were young or at any point in your life where your gender became really apparent to you. Now, I didn't have that because my name fit me, and the fact that people called me a boy fit me. The clothes I got dressed in, that suited me too, and all of those things were really easy, and they made sense, and it didn't feel uncomfortable for me at all. But that's not the case for everyone. So some people do have these experiences and these moments where they start thinking, well, actually, maybe the sex that was assigned at birth doesn't suit my gender identity. The clothes I'm wearing and the name I have and the pronouns I've given and all these things don't work for me as well as they do the person sitting next to me. That's what trans means. So the other side. Someone affirming gender is a big process, obviously. It's lengthy and it can be painful and it can be really stressful, not just for the individual, but also family members and friends and colleagues and everyone. But ultimately, someone who is affirming their gender goes through a long and individual process. Now, we've got 3 spaces here that we talk about. They're not the whole experience. They're just to give an idea to people who are starting on the journey here. So people can start by socially affirming their gender. So that's name changes, that's appearance, and that's the pronouns that they may or may not use. Then we can talk about the medical affirmation, which obviously like surgeries and hormones can include gender affirming surgery, and then the legal stuff, which is changing names, legal sex. The process is really hard. People don't necessarily do all of these stages of affirmation. They may or they may not, maybe in different orders, whatever it is. It's really individual. It's super dependent on each person. All we advocate for is trying to support people. So we'll definitely be talking about person-centered approach shortly. The way I like to talk about this is like, just be as nice as we can to people. It boils down to being kind. If you ask questions, that's great. If you're not comfortable asking questions, just treat them with respect and treat them with love and treat them with kindness. It goes for everyone. It particularly goes for people who don't get that treatment from everyone.
Can I ask a question? When you said that you don't touch based on the intersex variations and things like that, is that because you're talking about the sport itself, men against girl, or are you talking about you just don't have that space to facilitate them being in the, say, change room or something like that?
Intersex?
Intersex,
yeah. So
I'm
intersex.
just trying to sort of work out, like, when it's related to, say, me at the club. Like, the first thing that comes to my mind when I look at those kind of things, changing spaces, like where you get changed. I think most of us sport, it's gender-based.
Definitely.
But then when they get ready for that or they get out of that, creating that, again, going back to that safe space. I know that you're saying you can push in that direction, but I think it overflows into that transgender for me. I might be wrong, but it's those spaces that I really want to focus on.
For sure. So intersex and transgender often get talked about in kind of one and the same. They end up in the same policies and they end up in changing spaces, and they could be further from one another, but not by much. Intersex, most people who have intersex variations, this isn't everyone, and again, this isn't a space we're very familiar with, so this is stuff I've kind of picked up. A lot of people who have intersex variations don't know that they have intersex variations, so they don't look different, and they can go into the changing space that, generally speaking, would be their sex assigned at birth, and they'll never stand out. Not always, but this is very big generalities. So they differ quite significantly from the trans community, whereby you possibly know heaps of people with intersex variations that either don't know it themselves, because that's remarkably common, or they just don't need to tell you because, it's not a physical thing that you can see, and it might just be a body shape thing or whatever. So they sit quite separate. Naturally, with the changing spaces, that's where the conversation around trans people generally starts to spark up.
Because that's what I'm thinking now. I think, well, I don't, like, without leaving out a part of the community, I don't really need to be diving into that intersex, because it gets covered in gender, transgender banner, because I've got to look at it at my job. Like, I'm not going to be at this, like LSV, when you go to the top of it, they can go through the organisation, but I'm going to have to be looking at it from a club perspective, and how can I create that safe space and create those, the dialogue and everything like that, but back to that point of some people might not even want to come out, so they've just got to have that option to have that space.
So that's where definitely, we're doing a bit of, actually, Mandy might be a better place to answer this shortly, around facilities and change facilities particularly. Like, we're doing a bit of work with other municipalities around, like, what new change facilities look like, and is there gender neutral spaces, and stuff like that. I think, again, not coming from either of those communities, as in trans or intersex, but I've spoken to a lot of people who do, and I can say with reasonable confidence, no one from the trans or gender diverse or intersex community ever will put themselves in a space where they become the centre of attention. So if your club currently doesn't have facilities that suit them, they will almost always seek out the best option for themselves.
So could that be that instead of creating one space, because we have it at Yarra, when I used to work there, they've got, it was really cool, there was a male and a female dress, and then there was another one with half a dress and then half a body, and I was like, what, they made a mistake? and then I just realised, there's no actual male or female, it's just a whole environment that has individual rooms.
Yeah, well, James, Amanda, you were at the Pride and Sport Awards last week, right? Did either of you go to the toilet? Bit of a personal question, but don't worry, it'll make sense in a second. No? All right. Wow, they've been waiting for ages. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So there was no, it'll make sense, Sheila, I promise. You don't have to, Emma, just. So at that, so there was 300 people at this event, right? It was a pretty significant event, and all of the facilities in the whole building were changed to gender neutral for the night. So there was no gendered toilets. So like there was 300 people and no one had a problem and there wasn't any incidents and no one came to us saying either side, oh, I feel really unsafe in here, or oh, you're making me go to a gender neutral. Not one problem. So we don't always advocate for exclusively gender neutral because we're not in the market of erasing gender, but if you create spaces, like the arguments externally are way disproportionate to the actual reality of the situation. So did that make sense? Am I off the hook with that? Cool. Good. Yeah, so I think bathrooms are a big topic, but in my experience, they're kind of yet to become this flashpoint that everyone talks about them being.
Lifesaving clubs, it's more because, especially if you have nippers and
kids,
that's where it becomes, it's not so drastic for adults and things, but when you've got kids involved and they sort of, then it becomes an issue. So
definitely, for sure. I think, again, I don't do surf lifesaving, so I get that there's nuances in every sport. People are never going to put themselves in a position where they can be criticised. Like, if there is a trans person in your club and either they're out or they're not out, if they're not out, they're not going to go and walk into a space where people start talking about them. And they don't, if they're not out already, they don't want to have the moment where they come out in change rooms. So they will almost exclusively seek the safest option for them. And I know that the concern always is, oh, well, what about kids? And I totally get that. That's normal. Same at my hockey club too. Like, it's exactly the same conversations. But my personal view, and I have these arguments for it, it's like, if we can create a space that's safe for that person to be in our club, like the danger of someone walking into a change room isn't increased because that person's trans. Like, unless you've got a bodyguard at the front of your changing rooms every Saturday morning when the nippers are there, someone could walk in anyway. And it's very unlikely to be a trans person who's going to walk in and do something inappropriate. Just, that's the reality. It's also 2% of the population, so the odds are very low.
There's some work to do for us to, work these clubs with options, guidelines, and thought bubbles around. I think this is the questions we need to help clubs answer.
Yeah, definitely, because I did sort of reach out myself a couple of years ago and to, then it was Pride and Sport, they had an online thing down in the Peninsula, and we all got together and we had a chat. And that was one of their big focal points was the change rooms, because it was that one space that you kind of have to go, boy, girl. You can't choose to go, oh, I'll just get changed in the middle of the room. It's like that. So it's interesting that you say that they won't use that, but what do you do? And what I'm sort of gathering now, thinking on the spot, is you create a couple of those rooms as opposed to one where they can be isolated. Someone just might not want to change, or there might be an overflow, and that's the excuse that you could have. creating a blanket for them using that area. You could probably have a couple of them. Where for us as a club, we're very short and stuff like.
Probably practical and place.
That's right. So, you know, I would, like, there is space here in my club, but something like that, having LSV support, we could probably go to the functional committee and say, we need to create a safe space. And then, so as you said, there's some work that we could probably all do to help support.
Every people that are doing some of these great things in other sports or facilities and things like that, is the opportunity in all of us doing this together.
There's loads of facilities across Victoria that are working in this space and recognising as well that it is important to have male, female and options as well. Because it's outside of just a gender issue, there's cultural reasons as well. We need to still provide male and female change groups. We've done, and Melbourne City Bars have done good work, Brunswick Bars, lots of publicity, in particular, that's starting to spread out across the state. Just education as well. Our recent Pride, we have gendered change rooms. We had signs up outside the gendered change rooms to say we encourage people to use the change room that suits their gender identity. And then what you'll find in this space. So in this room, you're going to find cubicles with toilets and urinals and sinks, cubicles with toilets and wash basins and sanitary bins. And then within the actual change rooms, just education pieces of, do you feel like somebody in this space doesn't belong? List of do's, list of don'ts. And do's like list of don'ts like don't make them feel unsafe, don't make them, don't stare, don't do those things, and do let them use the space that they're legally entitled to. I'm sure there's plenty of statistics around things like UTIs, and for example, with transgender people, they're just too fearful to use a change room and make that decision of where am I going to go, what's going to happen.
Yeah, 100%. And also, the reality at the moment is we don't have a perfect fit-all solution. Like, you know, we're working with sports and governments and professional leagues, and everyone's trying to just feel their way through this at the moment. So it's sometimes really important just to, you know, we put our hand up and say, we can give you a suggestion, but we don't know the answer right now. Being able to admit that's important.
There's a lot of work we can do with policy, like the better served clubs, and that's the thing that clubs are looking to where you're having these options.
Yeah, long term,
and that's
it's
already
expensive solution, but we've got to
come over, but that's
practical interest solutions. Yeah.
So I think what I haven't heard is about inclusiveness. So we talk about us trying to make this decision, but actually getting informed of someone who is in that situation. What is going to work for you at our club? I think that's so important that we have that we may not have members who identify, but we're consulting, we're reaching out to people who have this experience potentially and been through it and saying, what will work for you? I work in an organisation where our CEO just went out and said, we're doing refix, and it's like, disabled toilets and not to design anyone except disabled people, and women's toilets for some women, people who are actually going to be using it. Like, I don't want any men designing women's toilets, not to happen. You know? And that's a kind of extreme thing, but it's a brave thing to do, to say, no, let's have the right people
100%
involved in this.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And like, I know when I was at hockey, we started to work in our trans and gender diverse space, and the very first thing we did, first meeting, is like, right, we need some genuine representation here, because it's all good and well, a bunch of me sitting around in a room, but like,
I will have best intentions.
Absolutely. You don't know what you don't know. No, totally agree. So this is probably almost goes to some of the things we were just talking about around safety of others, but focusing also on the safety of our trans community. So trans community currently has very poor health outcomes, both physical health and mental health. So predominantly the case, the reason for that, or exclusively the reason for that at the moment, is there's a lack of accessibility and there's a lack of knowledge. So we're really lucky at Pride and Sport. At our conference last year, we had Professor Ada Chung present. She's an endocrinologist, specialises in trans health, brilliant. And she says that, you know, there's a lot of people trying to work hard, but at the moment, doctors and GPs finishing university, there's no trans health unit or information whatsoever. So we have all these great people who are so smart, but they get to their first day of a GP and a trans person walks in and they have no idea how to help them. So not only that, the knowledge and skills and stuff aren't necessarily there in our health professionals at the moment. You get a couple of bad experiences in our trans community, draw back and think, oh, this is so stressful going to the doctor. So there's really bad health outcomes. Now I flagged off the top that there was a couple of moments that are quite confronting. Just circling back to that, this is the one. So the stat there, that 48% of young trans people attempt suicide is startling, I hope. It is, I hate it, I read it all the time, it never gets easier, you can't reconcile it, it's awful. These health outcomes are real. So, I always just wish I could go through this one. I think we just breathe with it for a second and kind of understand the gravity of it. The social support stuff is so important. Like, if you just use a young trans person's name and their pronouns, then you can reduce the depression symptoms by up to 70%, thoughts of suicide by 35%, and attempts by 65%. Now, I know where I used to, at hockey, we always say, we're not saving lives here. Once I started working in this space, you can actually do that. Actually, probably most people in this room do it day to day. So maybe that's less powerful here. But we can make real differences. And I'm unconscious of time. No. Okay. When I started working in this space and we started doing these trans guidelines at hockey, I was so lucky. I met this lady called Roxy, and she's a trans hockey player from North New South Wales. She's a legend and was so good for me and to me because she was so open with her story and her life and told me all this stuff. And the story that I like to roll out now, because it's, I hope, powerful, is she stopped playing sport when she was 25. So that's when she started a federal gym. When she started that, she didn't know what sport had to offer her anymore. And she just withdrew from all of the stuff, and she loved playing hockey when she was young. When she turned 50, a mate of hers called her and said, oh, playing in this Masters softball tournament, like, do you want to play? And she was like, oh, well, yeah, I haven't played any sport in 25 years, so let's do it. She went down and played, had a ball, loved it. So for the next 2 years, she was Googling guidelines for trans people to participate in sport, and she called and tried to learn, am I going to get tested? Like, what are the hurdles basically going to be put between me and being able to play sport again? So there was so much analysis that went into it from Roxy's perspective, and she eventually walked down to her local hockey club one night and went over and spoke to someone, and she said, look, I want to come and play hockey again. Mind you, 27 years since last time she played. And this person said, well, great, we train tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Do you have shin guards and a stick? And we'll see you there. And it's the easiest response to give. It's the response you give almost anyone who comes to ask, right? But Roxy's told me time and time again that she is certain that that conversation saved her life, because she is re-engaged in hockey now. And through that, she met us at Hockey Australia, and she now works with Pride in Sport, and she works with ACON, and she's so engaged in this community that she hasn't really been engaged in previously. But it was all started from just opening a door. Yeah, come on in, come and play. Bring your shin guards and we'll see you tomorrow night. It's just such a nice way that as sports people, we can do that. There's also obviously a host of other gender identities out there. The list is still growing. It's sort of what we were saying before about language and terminology. Like, it's expanding, it's changing, it's probably won't stop for quite some time. But it's important to kind of understand that there's lots of different ways that people identify now. When we look at gender expression, and over the next 2 bits you'll hear me talk about assumptions a lot, and the fact that we probably all make assumptions all the time. That part's very normal. and a like beliefs. I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, stop making assumptions, everyone. That's not going to happen. But once we start making assumptions, just pull it back a bit. You know? Just because historically, someone wearing a dress or flowy kit or makeup or long hair and painted fingernails, because historically that's told me something about all the other parts of their life, that doesn't mean that that's true. So we often associate clothes and hair and makeup and nails and jewellery with a gender identity, and that's not the case anymore. So I can't, we're not going to stop making those assumptions, but if we can just dial them back a bit once we've made it, I think it creates more space for people to be themselves. And it also is quite a similar thing for the variety of sexual orientations. So a lot of the sexual orientations you probably know, I always like to talk about bi plus community. They are invisible, might be a fair way of describing them. If you saw out here on the beach 2 men walking, holding hands, we would assume that that's a gay couple. 2 women would be a gay or lesbian couple, and a man and woman would be a straight couple. And that's just a simple assumption. Like, we take a shortcut, okay, and I know everything about it. Like, I learning so much all the time, but the bi plus community represents over 50% of the LGBTQ community. So the assumptions that we know something just by someone's current partner, and we heard it in the video at the very start, the person said, I'm bi, but I've got a boyfriend, so what does that really mean? Well, that means that they're bi with a boyfriend at the moment. That's what that means. It's an assumption piece. At our conference, I don't think anyone was there, but I said at the end, I was talking to another ally, and I was like, I don't know how to solve less invisibility for our bi community, but I think maybe talking about it from time to time would help. I still don't have any better answers, but I think if we can talk about it, that's useful. Yeah, it's such a big part of the LGBTQ community that just gets lost in the wash because it's a bit tricky and it's more nuanced, and I think we need to put more time into learning about it. So now we've got heaps of words all over the joint with heaps of lines in between them. That's quite nice. That's how we like to look at it. That's not representative. I've never looked into this graphic particularly closely, so it's really, just representative of. We don't expect you to know the definitions for all of these words. We don't expect to know how all of them fit in with one another, but if, actually Bo, my boss, used to tell her in quite a different way, he goes, I talk to my dad about religion from time to time, and then he would always say, which is quite a weird way to start a conversation when we talk about LGBTQ inclusion, but bear with me on that. He goes, if someone came up to you and told you what their religion was, you wouldn't tell them everything you know about that religion. And if you didn't know what it was, you wouldn't discard it, and you wouldn't say, oh, I've never heard of that, so that can't be real. That's all we're asking for in this space too. If someone tells you something about themselves and you don't know it, you know how easy it is to do stuff. It takes 10 seconds. And if they're comfortable sharing with you, have a conversation and just talk to people about it. You don't need to know all these words. It's just important to create space for people to be themselves. Ally stuff is really my home ground now. Being an ally is remarkably easy. Doesn't take much work at all, quite frankly. Allies also, LGBTQ space and like Pride now, they've done this brilliant job with like the marketing of the word ally. It clearly isn't just exclusively relevant to LGBTQ community, but it's done a pretty good job. It's on the badges and stuff. Like, they're doing it. It's good stuff, but it also, you can be an ally from within the community to other elements of the community, right? So one of the people I work with, we had a panel on Monday, and Ken goes, I'm a gay man, but I'm a trans ally. So you don't have to be an ally. An ally isn't just a straight person. It can be anyone to anyone else, which is a cool thing to know. What can we do to be better? We can be informed. You can come to training sessions, call Sheila, call us at Pride and Sport, listen to podcasts and talk to people, and Lifesaving with Pride are brilliant. Call them up and have a chat, and if you need to learn stuff, call James. Now that he's a representative, there you go. He'll give you his mobile number later. be visible, promoting yourself. So like on social media, you can throw your pronouns on there in like 1 second now. It's really cool. It's so easy. Wearing a rainbow, I know that through these training sessions, some people think the rainbow is reserved for members of the LGBTQ community. It's not. You can wear it no matter who you are. It's actually really powerful. But the more I wear it, the more I learn how powerful it is. Like I have a baseball cap that's just got a normal baseball cap, the Boston Red Sox logo, but it's in a rainbow. Most people don't even see that. Most people don't even notice it. But the people who notice it, it means an awful lot to them. The lanyards are great and wristbands are great and whatever it is. Like I know when I play hockey, I love wearing the socks because it just shows, it's just a small show of like, I'm a safe person to talk to. Like I'm on your team, I'm here for you. Those things, like it's very easy to do. And then being part of the solution, calling out behaviour from the data that we have, calling out behaviour is the #1 thing that LGBTQ community wants from their allies. Now, I get that sometimes calling out behaviour can be stressful. It's relative to who's displaying the behaviour. If my CEO displayed the behaviour, it's a heaps more stressful conversation than if someone who works beneath me does or if a mate does, because that's easier. But I always advocate for calling it out in a way that also doesn't make you feel really uncomfortable doing it. We should feel a bit uncomfortable because that's part of the deal. Like we shouldn't have this behaviour, but finding ways that you can do it, whether that be subtle or otherwise, finding ways to call out behaviour is really good. And then what we can do from here. So these are more tangible things that you can take away. So adopting that person-centered approach, care about people, look after people first. Language is really important. I know particularly in team sports all the time, and I'm so guilty of this every single Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, that I would yell, "Come on boys," regularly. And every time I go, "Oh, I've got to find a better way to say that." But I'm working on it. Sometimes I don't say that. But adopting, gender neutral language is really critical. And like I said at the start, asking questions in ways that doesn't push someone down into, the path that we think they should be taking. Being the positive cue is so important. You can ask questions. That's not illegal. As long as you're asking them respectfully. I always think as an ally, like if I'm asking a question coming from a place where I'm trying to learn and be better and I can be a better ally, it's always received nicer than asking a question coming from a place where I want to, nitpick someone or, "Oh, you told me this about you," but like, the guy, "Tom, I went and saw a session and like that doesn't perfectly marry up, so maybe you're wrong." That's a bad question. But asking about someone's pronouns, asking if someone's starting to share things with you, being comfortable, listening and trying to take in information is a really good way. And then when mistakes happen, probably made them tonight. I always think I probably do in these sessions. They happen all the time. People at the awards last week definitely made mistakes. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. We want to make as few as we can, but like we're never going to get better if we don't make any mistakes. So be really conscious of it, acknowledge it, apologise, and try and keep getting better. And that is it. Are there any questions? Fire away. But I think we're about to sit down for 20 minutes to actually maybe save them. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Just really briefly, first of all, Tom, we're so lucky to have him, first of all, to come in and give us some really powerful, yet confronting but powerful information that we really need. It is all about education. There is a lot to digest, but we're in a really safe space to be able to do that firstly and then to unpack it together to move forward. As Em said earlier, we do have a lot more work to do, but we're going to do that together and we are going to do that right. So thank you so much, Tom, first of all, for presenting that content. I know how much it means to you as well, having worked through the preparation with you, and we're really grateful to have you here in the room and also to humanise it as well. So really appreciate that. We are going to have a really relaxed panel conversation shortly, but what I thought we could firstly do is all stretch our legs for 5 or 10 minutes, head out to the bar, grab a beverage of choice,
not top shelf, and plate up some food. We have got some food for you served out there. So, if we could all together move out and plate up some food, grab a drink, and then we could come back in here and have a panel session. Great. Hi, welcome back. If everybody's nice and settled back in, please, that food will be there if you do decide to have another little top up. And if you need any more beverages, I'll organise some more water in here. I do note that it is been consumed. So I'm going to throw back to Tom now. We've got some conversations to share, and I just urge, because to keep up the trend of being open and in a safe environment to do so, I urge you to interact with those that are up the front talking through what they talk through, and ask some questions, and add anything or share anything that you believe would benefit yourself, but also those in the room as well, because this is exactly why we added the panel component to this session. We've got the information, we know we've got the solid resources to move forward. Now let's humanise it, and even more so, and have some good quality conversations and ask some good questions. All right, so Tom, I might throw straight to you and get straight into it.
Right, let's go. Express panel sessions, I haven't briefed either of you, but I've got some questions here, which are obviously great, but we might just see, does anyone have any questions for James, or do you know everyone, Mandy?
Pardon?
Do you know everyone in the room?
No.
Great, let's start there. Can you introduce yourself, please, Mandy?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mandy Walker. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator with Active Monash, so the 3 recreation centres within Monash Council. I have been in this role since sometime in COVID. It's a blur. But I've been with Monash for the past 17 years, particularly in the swim school space. And I've been really lucky and fortunate to work quite closely with this role previous to me coming into it.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Anytime.
Does everyone know James?
I think most people,
broadly speaking.
Give us a quick. But yeah, otherwise I'm James, pronouns of he, him. I'm a member down at Hampton Lifesaving Club. I've been around lifesaving since I was 4 years old, I think, a very long time. I do a lot with the sort of state level at lifesaving in terms of the operations officer for Port Phillip, sit on the LSOC exec and the training council, but then also with Sheila and Emma trying to do or get the Pride and Inclusion bandwagon rolling at LSV, and more recently been involved with Lifesavers with Pride, who did the rescue boards along with SLSA to sort of get a Victorian voice on what is usually a more Sydney-centric community, I guess, but trying to get that as a more national voice.
Awesome. And we've got 2 apologies tonight who both were going to be available, but due to unforeseen circumstances couldn't be here. So Rylan, who is from Melbourne Surge Water Polo, which is a LGBTQ water polo club. Rylan and I are also office mates. He works at Thornton Harbour Health, which is essentially the Victorian equivalent of ACON, which is my business. And then Steve was from Ambulance Victoria, who unfortunately wasn't able to get here either. So we do thank both of them for putting their hand up. And then I talked for an hour and a half, so you probably got me covered. I reckon we can just, I'm more comfortable just throwing open to anyone if there are any questions rather than going down the pre-ordered questions. So does anyone have anything? It can be for any of us, really. It can be based on practical tips or
The first question's always the hardest.
That's it? Yeah. Yes. No?
I think there's not so much a question, but I'll be definitely touching base and talking about that safe space environment that we can start to create.
Definitely. And a lot of it starts with conversation. Sheila and I were speaking before that it's becoming more obvious that there's a shift now in these spaces that have gone down the pride path around the minority being those that aren't really on board with it, and you're always going to have that. But it's working out how to start those conversations with your teams, creating the space for your teams to be able to ask questions and engage in it. Very quickly opens up a lot of information and doors you didn't realise was even at your fingertips with who's present and in front of you and their experiences and their values, etc. So, yeah.
Actually, I'll follow up with the question then. How would you, as at a club, say like myself, where we've had Pride Patrol, we've had no events, we've sort of reached out to organisations when we did Pride March. I actively went around to say -18, so if you ever have anything with the underage kids on the peninsula, you can use that facility. I'm going to create a safe space that's future planning, that they can come into the club at that younger age. Any other groups that were on the peninsula that they could do the exact same thing. But how would you say I start that conversation in a club that there's not been conversation, like there's understanding. I haven't got any members that I feel, I actually alive there's one member that I've got big issues with that I'll need to ask a follow-up question in a minute. But how do I start that conversation? How do I begin?
Really, it sounds a lot easier than it actually is, but it's jumping 2 feet in and it's just getting straight into it, particularly with those ones that are the challenge on it. A lot of conversation that I have, the centres that I immediately work with, we have a very diverse range of culture that we work with both patrons and employees. And it's a clear, gentle message from me of not everything is for everyone. That's okay. And like we said in the presentation, it's not about changing people's beliefs, but it's about being kind and not being really difficult about it. So by engaging organisations that can deliver training, and there is loads when it comes to inclusion in sport in particular, and that is sport club focused, it's starting with those, it's running those one-on-one sessions, it's really just introducing it, regardless of if you've got some knowledge in the club and not a lot. Just start at the base and just refresh everybody and start to build everybody up from there. Is probably the best way to get it going, and also lower your expectations with the engagement of it. So even if it's only a handful that are engaging to begin with, that's a positive start. And then they'll be the ones that will then start roping everybody else in when they see your commitment to continuously delivering.
Okay. It sounds like you already have started, like Pride Patrol, the rescue board that you've got. Having those things just at your club has already started that conversation. And yeah, like you were saying, it's lower your expectations. Like when we first started Pride March, you know, Shields and everyone know there was what, two or three people. And then what, 5-6 years later, we've now got Pete at the front with his whistle and having a ball all the time. And we had the most people that we've had. It just keeps growing year on year. So not being afraid to start out with that small group and then building as you go.
Yeah, because that's like you're right, we do have those events, but for me it feels like we haven't addressed and we haven't engaged, because like I said, I've tried to reach out to those organisations and groups, but just nothing's sort of come back from there. And that's probably another question, Tom. Is there a registry, is there a place where people within sport with pride, is there somewhere where they see other organisations talked about before about how they go, what club would be accepting of this? Is there a centralised place where people can find out, they go, oh, Lifesaving, this club's extremely, active in inclusive. Is there something that
good? It's a good question, and it would actually be wicked to have that. I don't think that exists as of now. I guess there are ways you might be able to find that information. So, for example, we have our member list on our website, right? So you would be able to go and see the LSV logo and the SLSA logo, and that would probably point you in the direction of sports that are at least on this pathway. It doesn't necessarily point you down to you don't drill down to a club level based on that. But interestingly, it probably brings me to a point I advocate a lot of clubs to do. So Pride March is brilliant and a Pride board is fantastic, and on your website, whack up a rainbow flag. All that stuff is really cool, and I'm a huge advocate for it. I think that visibility is important. I would also encourage clubs to review governance and policy as a first port of call. I think the risk that we run with visibility being our first step is that if someone comes into your club and isn't represented within policy and within governance, and whether it be board breakdowns, most board breakdowns probably say something like 50-50, men to women splits, something like that. But that doesn't represent everyone now. So if you're looking to volunteer and, just little things that we have written in policy are generally from our binary setup, because policy's not that fun to review. We do it a lot. It doesn't get more fun, but it's critically important. So someone might, for example, if someone lives down your way, the first thing they might do is jump on your club website. Yeah. And if they see a rainbow flag, that's great. And if they see nothing else that suggests that they're going to be safe, that's the question mark. So yeah, I would definitely, if looking at policy and governance is something you have capacity to do, I would strongly recommend that.
I don't want to set up all the room, but just one last one. Sure. I'm just trying to thought. I was going to ask that as well. When do you think that? Because for me, I'd like to. We talked to Aspendale, Chad. He's been great. He's say if someone does something wrong, it's a minor, major, or a critical, and he's got repercussions for each kind of offence, or how you go about it. So do you recommend that I would put these things in place surrounding the LGBT community first, as opposed to going down this other road? Because that's the problem I'm having now. I've got one member that's so toxic, so masculine, but then a member of his family belongs to the community as well. But I don't know whether it's him fighting with his own battles, but it's so damaging to everyone else. Like, how do I stop that? How do I, without getting too passionate?
So when you talk about charity, is that major mind? Is that specifically about any disability?
Anything, like say someone's getting drunk and actually says, it's the paper, this is what happened, it was just flat, I've learned this way.
I think, for me, it just, sorry to jump in, but it comes down to code of conduct and also an inclusion. So we've got an inclusion and diversity statement that we have on our website, but I think it also comes down to code of conduct. So I think you're probably better off pushing in, in some ways, an inclusion and diversity statement on the website is a bit of a tick box exercise, but you are right when you say if someone does go to your webpage and they see it, when they're like, it does make them feel welcome. It's the same as that code of conduct, they're front and centre. But I think for me, that's the path that I'll go down, is try and, it sounds like you sort of need to do more stuff. This is not the wrong way, but more of the low-hanging fruit stuff that you can grab and do so that it's visible, and then hopefully
I mean, it just depends on the toxicity of it. You might, you know what I mean? But if you can probably, for me, I'll be trying to do more of that stuff you can actually do that doesn't take a huge amount of effort, but then get that low stuff and then delve into that in 12 months' time or something.
Yeah.
It's got to, for me, it's just the smallest, keep ticking off the small things, the small things, the small things, and get your people on board. It's about, getting the people in the team and just everyone sort of to walk behind you, so to speak.
A great low-hanging fruit space to start with in that is if you have policy already that exists around behaviours, code of conduct, etc., if it's not acceptable from a cultural perspective, if it's not acceptable from a disability perspective, it's not acceptable from an LGBT perspective either. But by spelling that out makes it much clearer to follow through. So if you have it listed out around code of conduct when it comes to cultural differences or ability, then spell it out for LGBT as well. So then it's starting with your foundations. It's very clear that what's accepted and what's not accepted. Then you can build into your policy from there. Then you can build into your programs, and it becomes embedded in it. Going back to what you were saying earlier about the a place to go to find inclusive spaces for people to access. If you look now from an access and inclusion perspective, there's a plethora of websites that have a database of facilities, spaces, programs, etc., that are around disability accessibility that have taken years to get to that space. This space is now back where we were 5, 10 plus years ago in the disability space and the cultural space. So it'll come, it's just not there yet. We need more people talking about it and more people investing time into it to get to where those areas are at.
Yeah, good. It sounds like for me, even though I want to dive in, it sounds like the baby steps could be more further, foundations would be more solid.
Yep.
Just one, and probably for any club that's starting to do this stuff. So Pride in Sport does a Pride in Sport index every year. We have a community one and a standard one. I know that SLSA did it this year, and LSV will do it next year for sure. But it gives you, we're not meant to market it like this, but I definitely used it like this when I was at hockey. It's a great roadmap of foundational stuff that you can do. So it's basically scored out of 100. For the standard, it's about 60 or something for the community, but it's got, foundation things around policy and governance, foundation things for visibility, foundation things for engagement, and then education as well. So if you're looking for literally line items where you can go, this is a foundation step that we can do, I strongly recommend, if it's not still on our website, then my email's right there. Feel free to flick me an email if you want to get that community template, particularly for the clubs. It just gives you like 100 different little steps that you can do no matter where you're at on the journey. So I think it's a really good way to start this process.
And it's eye-opening.
Yep. Don't get too, it's a really good point, Emma. Don't get too overwhelmed when you open it. It looks heavy, and it can be, but it's also designed to basically score best practice in all the spaces. So like, for example, in our standard index this year, the highest score, and it's the highest score we've ever had, is 70. So, don't panic when you open it and it's quite intense looking. It gives you a really good way to kind of, pick off some of these low-hanging fruits. Now, very conscious of time, Sheila, but we probably do have time for one more question, if there's one out there.
I don't have a question, but just more like a comment. I'm also an ally, not part of the community, but I think I'm pretty good with most of it. But tonight has been good because it's made me think a bit more. As well as my lifesaving stuff, I'm the team manager of a women's football team. And it's made me think the amount of times I've sort of said, girls, such and such, or when they're playing football, get on your man, which is a really common expression in football, and just making me think about it a bit more and think about ways that within the team we can sort of change some of the really common language. So, it's not just a lifesaving thing, but it's making me think about other areas as well. So thank you.
No, my pleasure. That's awesome. And I'll just tell you right before, is there a question, Em? Go.
So both of you are here and so full of knowledge, and just if you've seen one thing over your time of what you've been doing that's been impactful, that you think we could implement easily, some of that low hanging fruit. That's a big question while you think about it. Jane, what have you seen? You've done your journey since you were 4. I've marched beside you. You know, I know you're incredibly proud of putting the red and yellow on a march. I'd love to know what's the shift been, or what's the most important thing or impactful thing you've done or seen?
I think probably one of the most impactful spots, and I was thinking about this before when I was sitting down, would have been when I was 20 or so. And I took one of my female friends down to a lawn carnival just to watch. And a few of my mates from the club I was at the time were like, oh, is that your girlfriend? I'm like, no. And they're like, oh, I thought you were seeing someone. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm seeing a guy back at home. They're like, oh, yeah, cool. And then moved on. And I think that small little act of not really caring or just saying, oh, yeah, cool. Like, are you seeing anyone? Like you said, you know, not do you have a girlfriend or a but there's that little act of, oh, yeah, great, has been sort of what I've experienced a lot through Lifesaving, which has been fantastic. So just continuing on with just accepting people who they are and as they come, and yeah, just remembering those gender neutral terms: partner, they, person, that sort of thing.
I'll ask one too. Do you think it's a generational change that we're seeing this shift, or do you think that it's just something that's there that we need to shift, or what is it that we need to be doing?
Oh, me, right. I'm torn on this one. Yes, there's clearly generational awareness around this, right? Younger people are probably better with terminology and more open and more okay with the concept of gender identity. And so, yes, I think it's a lot easier for younger people to pick up and run with all of the shifts that are happening. But I'm very lucky. I've got 2 grandparents, and one of my cousins is gay, and it took some wrapping their head around that, but he's been out for quite some time, so that's cool. And I've got another cousin who affirmed her gender late last year. And I wouldn't say, particularly my grandpa, I wouldn't say like politically correctness is his strong suit, but he has really quickly changed the way he talks about her and uses her name now and her pronouns. And so it definitely can, shifts can happen. It's not that hard, but I think personal connection to this is a really powerful driver. I've always believed that stories and lived experience is such a crucial way to convey this message. So yes and no, I guess. Are we done, Sheila?
Just one.
Yes, one tip.
I think the most powerful thing that I've seen from our space within Monash has been the community consultation. So everything that we've done in this space has been driven by a community advisory committee. We have advisory committees for a multitude of spaces within council, but it is Monash City Council residents who apply to be a part of the LGBTIQA+ advisory committee. They get to work in close with the community strengthening team, get to work in close with councillors, because councillors have a responsibility of being involved in those spaces, that have driven our action plan, that have driven the work that's happening in the Rainbow Tick accreditation, in everything that's happening in that space is coming from community. So I think that's probably where we get our biggest impact. And it's definitely something a lot of people within the areas that I work in recreation are seeing, that we need to consult. We need to go to the experts and say, as we said earlier, what do you need? What can we do to make you feel safe, feel seen, feel valued as a part of the community, instead of making that decision for them?
Brilliant.
Wow, well, we could keep going. What do you think? First of all, please applause for our. As I was doing that, the lights were flashing. Applauding too. I think this, I can safely, you could all agree with me that this was a really insightful session with some really great questions asked and some really good conversations had. And if this is a starting point for you, that's pretty exciting for where we're moving, considering how long Lifesaving has been around and where it was to where it is now, to where it is going. If this is nothing else but motivation and confidence in moving forward to do more, to do better, we can certainly guarantee that. So the next steps are to continue to engage the experts, to continue to engage those with lived experience, to continue to engage communities, and we will certainly be connecting you with those in the room to move forward. I've had some really great conversations tonight in regards to that, because you are all here for a similar yet different purpose. And we wanted to make sure that we have everything in place, or attempt to have everything in place to move forward in the best way possible. So a lot of things to think through in your little notebooks that you have. Reflect and journalise and reach out and stay connected. Regarding next steps, Em, did you want to talk to that just for a moment before we formally wrap up?
Yeah, just really briefly. As we said, we wanted to do this first. We wanted to do awareness 101 and get moving and tap into our expertise. Tom and Pride in Sport is absolutely on board, so pleased to have that expertise at our disposal now. From here, we've now got access to some free training that we can tap into that happens regularly through Pride in Sport online. I know we all love circulars, but stay tuned to your circulars. We'll also do a wrap up of that, but the whole intent is that we'll start running these awareness sessions with you and your members over the next months in the lead up into the season, and then working to develop an action plan, which will include the Pride Index and using that as our action plan moving forward. You know, some of these things we've talked about tonight are part of those next steps and how we come together to build guides and build information together. And you know, the leading up to the club pre-season forum, I'm going to get it right this year. You know, we'll definitely be launching some guides and information on that. But we want to get our network, our Pride network going as well, which will be a reference group. So stay tuned for more, but it's kind of rubber hitting the road now. You know, we can't do all these initiatives without like living and breathing and taking baby steps. So we just want to get the right things in place, and then we'll go that side.
Great, thank you, Emma. If anything comes to mind that you need support in moving forward that we haven't touched on tonight, and that is, you know, relevant to your club and to your current situation, please communicate that, because that's how we define where we go, and that's, you know, we need your voice, your voices. So please reach out and let us know moving forward. But again, thank you for your time and thank you for your patience as we ticked over 15, 20 minutes. You have a